Joining us now to discuss that, Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president. Kellyanne, welcome back.
It is so great to be with you, Brian. I love your intro.
I just thought it was extremely well written as someone who has to put together speeches, but not like that, on an hour and 21 minutes. And I think it was more of a slice of life than look at me. I think it was, here's the highs of the Apollo launch. Remember Normandy. Remember what brings us together fighting against kids' cancer. And by the way, this is what I'm hoping to get done without creating an enemies list. So the crafting of it, I think, worked to the point where I think a bunch of networks are getting panicked. They have to say nice things about the president today.
They're getting panicked, and certainly their friends in the 2020 Democratic field ought to be panicked, Brian, because they sat there last night, some of them in that chamber, and didn't clap or applaud, let alone stand up when the president was talking about record low unemployment for women, that women are filling these jobs, that human trafficking is being stopped. The president actually, in the First Lady's box, honored Elvin Hernandez, an ICE agent, whose one of his expertise is trying to help these women, help these girls and women from the human trafficking and sex trafficking that is happening. It is a crisis. It is real and present. Look, this was the president's way of showing once a year he is president of the country. He's not the head of the party. He's not the head of just the White House staff. He is the head of our entire nation. And he so loves this country that I don't want that to be lost in our conversation about the substance and the vision and the record of accomplishments. He so loves this country that was weaved throughout his entire address. This is somebody who wanted to recognize these American milestones of greatness. Buzz Aldrin and the landing on the moon, that'll be 50 years this July. Normandy and D-Day, that'll be 75 years in June. And yet weaving together, bringing together in that box on a world stage, the man who helped liberate someone else at that 75 years ago. And, of course, Judah Semet on his 81st birthday. I spent some time yesterday with he and his daughter at the White House. On his 81st birthday, the whole world knows who Judah is now. He survived not once but twice. He survived the Holocaust at the age of 6 or 7, and then, of course, the Tree of Life massacre at the synagogue in Pittsburgh. So the president actually gave his address through the stories of other people. Normally, Brian, you have a president standing there giving a laundry list of all the pie-in-the-sky things they want to do, a couple of joyful noises here and there about bipartisanship or unity. But this president weaved together the stories of other people to try to advance his agenda and try to make us all feel better about being Americans. I got to tell you, the ad makers for 2020, they're probably working overtime today because the amount of the sitting on the hands, the furrowed brows, the eye rolling at the president listing out great American accomplishments and visionary things we can work on together. Why wouldn't we want to eradicate AIDS? Why wouldn't we want to try to work together to lower drug prices and get meaningful infrastructure and continue to talk to Chairman Kim while sanctions are still on him? Why wouldn't we want to stop engaging in, quote, endless wars? Not tomorrow, not next month, maybe not next year, but soon enough. And the last thing I want to say to you before you pose the next question is this president enjoyed himself, and I hope everybody sees that.
Yeah.
And he absolutely enjoyed himself when the speech was being crafted, when he was learning about the different guests and their biographies and their stories. He was enjoying himself as he was going through it with his Sharpie. He loves this job because he loves this country. And it's one time each year that nobody else can interrupt with a stupid panel of 8 people telling you what you just heard as opposed to what you just heard.
Right.
People getting in his partisans, getting his way with the snarkiness. It's his chance to say, I love this country, I know you love this country. In Washington, the people of the United States of America sent to Washington a disruptor, but they also sent somebody who's a quintessential non-politician. And he doesn't talk like a politician. He talks like a businessman. It was a very accessible talk. And I'm so glad, improbably, Brian, but emphatically, the most pro-life president in our lifetimes, if not in the history of this country, is Donald J. Trump.
Right.
And he doesn't hide from it. He doesn't focus group it. He doesn't just say it in privately, and he doesn't just use words. He's got action. He called on Congress to stop these late-term abortions and abortions when fetuses can feel pain. That's a pro-life president.
I know, and Democrats are going to be forced to answer that. I saw Governor McAuliffe said, I'm not for that late term. He also said...
Since when? His party is.
Well, right. They're going to be, instead of I didn't hear it and I got to reframe it, soon they're going to have to address it. Now, I want you to hear this. The president went out of his way to say, hey, by the way, we're not a socialist country.
Here in the United States, we are alarmed by the new calls to adopt socialism in our country. Tonight, we renew our resolve that America will never be a socialist country.
But they're talking, almost everybody not named Mike Bloomberg is talking about free preschool, free college, Medicare for all for free, and that is his prescription for a huge bill, as well as a green policy that destroys fossil fuel. So these are the types of things that is not market-based. There's not capitalist principles woven into that. So do Democrats not agree with that?
And this is why the president, if you go back and look at his line, he talked about America was formed on principles, not quote, government domination and control. That was very important because you have the president of the United States defining socialism for the rest of America. And I know people want to focus on this member of Congress or that member of Congress. Brian, it's creeping throughout the entire party. It will be a theme in 2020. So this president has to knock it down in early 2019. And you're right. The opposite of that is the way we were founded, which is free market capitalism. You've seen these polls, as I have, over time, that particularly younger generations don't appreciate capitalism. They feel like they're more for socialism. But when you dig down in a lot of those polls and focus groups, as I have in my previous life, you find out that they don't really understand that social sounds great.
Right.
They don't understand necessarily that socialism means exactly what you just described, which is these budget-busting measures that sound great and flowery, but would bust the budget and would be unfair to the 157 million Americans the president said are working hard and trying to get ahead in the capitalistic society. I have faith. I have great faith in the wisdom of Americans. They are going to push back on this ideological leftist drift on all of these policies. It is amazing to me.
But it's already happening on the left. It's happening with Mike Bloomberg and Howard Schultz. They say, wait a second, and they're getting blistered.
You know why they're getting blistered? And it's so ironic to me, Brian. Let me interject. They're the two capitalists. They're the two guys who have made it out of nothing. They both know, neither of them inherited. They made it out of nothing. Successful billionaires, job creators, who have also been engaged in the private insurance system for their employees for decades, and both say, don't kill the private insurance system.
But Kellyanne, I want you to hear this whole thing, and they had 3 or 4 points I want you to respond to because your previous job, you were a pollster and understand trends. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez defended the fact, went after the president on a myriad of issues. He says the president is getting panicked and defensive. Listen.
I think that he needs to do it because he feels himself losing on the issues. Every single policy proposal that we have adopted and presented to the American public has been overwhelmingly popular, even some with a majority of Republican voters supporting what we're talking about. When we talk about a 70% marginal tax rate on incomes over $10 million, 60% of Americans approve it. 70% of Americans believe in improved and expanded Medicare for all. A very large amount of Americans believe that we need to do something about climate change and that it is an existential threat to ourselves and to our children. And so I think he sees himself losing on the issues. He sees himself losing on the wall and on the southern border. And he needs to grasp at an ad hominem attack. And this is his way of doing it. But what we really need to realize that what is happening is that this is an issue of authoritarian regime versus democracy. And in order for him to try to, dissuade or throw people off the scent of the trail, he has to really make and confuse the public.
Is that what he's trying to do? Confuse the public? And the stats show that she's right?
No, I've looked over that polling, and I was in polling for decades, Brian. If you phrase the question so that it just is it's feel-good phraseology rather than really digging into the ideology behind it, you're always going to get pie-in-the-sky numbers. If you ask people, hey, are you afraid of climate change, or scientists say this or scientists say, if you don't tell people what it's going to cost them or what they're going to have to sacrifice in return for her getting her way, then those polls are illegitimate. And by the way, the polls don't even matter on this because the president got elected on many of the things he talked about last night. He could not have been more clear 1 year ago. And those now he's just trying to make them real. Look, even Speaker Pelosi, in a phone call with the president last week, which he tweeted about so I can talk about publicly, she mentioned she raised infrastructure and drug pricing with him as two areas they can work on. So let's have at it. Let's ignore the ankle biters and the naysayers, those who are just finding their sea legs in the Congress and others, and those who just don't believe in working together, who don't believe in common sense solutions to benefit this country. And the Speaker knows that because she's got a very disparate conference to manage here, and it's not clear that she does have control over them. Sure, she won the speakership, but what does she say to the 31 Democrats who represent congressional districts that Donald Trump won in 2016? What does she say to the 22 freshmen? Of them are freshmen. You see some of them on TV. We have some of them come to the White House as, say, the Problem Solvers Caucus, and individually they approach us, hey, we'd like to try to work together, because they go home and they get an earful. What is happening to your party, your Democratic Party, they're asked? What is happening that you're drifting to the left? And then, of course, they hear from legal immigrants in their.
Yeah. Wow, she just dropped off there for a second.
General, were you aware of the president's intention to order the withdrawal of our troops from Syria before that was publicly announced?
I was not aware of the specific that announcement. Certainly, we are aware that he has expressed a desire and intent in the past to depart Iraq.
So you weren't consulted before that decision was announced?
We were not. I was not consulted.
Senator Angus King, the Armed Services, asking the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Joe Votel, about the president's decision to pull troops out, which has now been slowed down, and was he not aware? With us right now, Kellyanne Conway, kind enough to get back on the line when the Earth rejected her call right before she was going to close with us. Kellyanne, what did the president say about the general coming out saying he wasn't informed of that ahead of time? And why wouldn't he tell the general what he wanted to do?
Well, the president was conferring with his generals here and across the globe, but the president campaigned on this. I don't know why everybody's surprised that the president said this nation, a great nation, will not engage in endless wars. He said it many times before. He reaffirmed it last night. If you go back to his speech about his Afghanistan policy in September of 2017, he announced it in Virginia. And he said, it's not the Bush policy, it's not the Obama policy. We're not going to pull out tomorrow because it would hurt the wrong people. But, folks, we're not going to be there indefinitely forever either. It absolutely, deeply disturbs the president to sign these letters where he is telling another family, we're so sorry the United States of America warns with you. Your son, and in some cases your daughter, has been killed. He goes to Walter Reed. He sees the devastation.
No, I understand that. But pulling out early has people jumping out of buildings in New York City and the Pentagon.
But what does that mean? What does early mean? They like to define that on their own. It will be a responsible...
the enemy doesn't go away, and we're not really fighting in Syria. And in Afghanistan, it's aiding, training, and supporting. But in Afghanistan... it was surprising because we're in the middle of talks with the Taliban at the time.
Yes, and the president addressed that squarely last night. He said it squarely last night. He spent several minutes on this very topic, and everybody should go watch what the president said, not what partisan senators or others from across the aisle are saying.
Lastly, there's some good news in that it looks like Nita Lowney said that they're making progress in the talks with Republicans on some type of deal before the 15th, but they might need a short order of a week's spending to continue. What progress can you tell us about, Kellyanne?
Well, Brian, we were really happy to hear that, too, because the president has tried to just let the conferees have their time and their space to do their job. We need a Congress that acts on immigration. They failed to do that for many decades. So the president is willing to sign something that everybody knows what's important to him, the physical barrier, the rest of the wish list that the Democrats and Republicans share. But I think if one of the upshots of last night's truly outstanding, remarkable, unifying
10 seconds
call to action speech is the conferee saying, you know what, the president said, let's get it done, let's get it done. So
Gotcha.
we feel good. We feel great. The president said he didn't have a lot of faith in it happening.
Thanks, Kellyanne.